The AMS is a fantastic tool, and the way that it has made multi-material printing so easy and accessible to so many people is a big reason as to why Bambu Labs has done so well. But to make the most of it, you need to know how to use the different painting tools in Bambu Studio. So in this video, I'm going to be going through each of the tools, explaining what they do, as well as going through some of the techniques that I use whilst painting in Bambu Studio. I'll be using my TARDIS lamp model, which is available now to download from MakerWorld or printables.com, as the example. So as the doctor themselves say, allons-y. Painting in Bambu Studio allows you to select specific areas of different models to then be printed using specific filaments. If you're using something like a Bambu Labs AMS, this will then automatically change the filament between each of these areas, allowing you to then print either multi-color or multi-material prints. The specific painting you apply, however, is only applied to the exterior of your model and does not give you control over the color on the inside of the model. This will be automatically generated as the model is sliced. I have, however, recently uploaded a tutorial showing you how you can paint the inside of your model with volumetric color, and I'll leave a link to that in the description below. But for now, let's get started with this painting masterclass. The first thing you want to do is go up to the filaments section and ensure any of the filaments and colors that you're planning on using here are already set in this section. You can hit the plus button up here to add additional filaments. Make sure that they are set to the right material type, and once they're set, you can then go through and change the colors to what you want to use in your print. So I'll be getting onto the TARDIS in a little bit, but to start out, I'm going to take you through each of the tools, and for that, I'm going to just use a demo test cube that I threw together for another one of my tutorials. So with an item selected, go up and select the color painting tool, or you can just press N on your keyboard. When you go into painting mode, any other objects on the print bed and the bed itself are all hidden, so you're only then looking at the item that you're painting. This will make it much easier to see the different areas that you need to access. At the top of the color painting menu is a list of the filaments that you have applied in the filaments section. Each of these will be in a numbered box, and you can select them either by just clicking on the box, or for the first 9, you can just press the associated number on your keyboard. Below that is a tool type menu where you get to choose which tool you're going to be painting with and any associated settings. Underneath that is the section view option. This allows you to access difficult to reach areas of your print so you can paint them. As you drag this bar across, it hides a section of your print. The further you drag this bar across, the more of your print is hidden. You can either drag it with the bar, or you can hold the Alt key on your keyboard whilst scrolling up and down on your mouse to adjust the level of sectional view. When you start a sectional view, it's always going in the camera's direction, so away from the camera. Pressing the Reset Direction button will reset the direction of the sectional view to whatever your current camera angle is. If you ever want to get rid of a sectional view, all you have to do is drag the bar all the way to the left or enter 0 and click enter. Now let's get painting. The first of the tools is the circle tool. This is effectively just a pen or brush tool. You can adjust the pen size by the bar here, or holding the Control key on your keyboard and scrolling the mouse wheel up and down. To paint the highlighted area, just click the left mouse button. You can then click and drag if you wanted to paint a larger area. Think of the circle tool like a beam coming from the camera and then directed through the circle that you're painting. This will paint any surface of the object that you're clicking on that is within that circle from the perspective that you are painting. So as you can see here, I painted a circle on the corner here, but you can see that as I changed my perspective, it's filled every area of the faces that were within the circle from that original perspective. As this is a perspective-based tool, it's not going to paint on hidden surfaces. However, it will paint on hidden areas of a visible surface, providing the joining point between that surface and the one that you click on is within the realms of that circle from your original perspective. If you hold Shift on your keyboard whilst painting on an object with any of the painting tools, it will ignore the filament that you have selected and instead revert that area of your print to the default filament applied to that object. Equally, if you come up and click Erase All Painting, it will erase anything that you have painted onto that object, resetting the entire thing to the default filament that you had set. The next tool is the Sphere tool. Now, this is very similar to the Circle tool, but instead of applying the paint to the visible facets within that area, it applies to the volume of the sphere. Just like you can change the size of the circle, you can change the volume of the sphere either by dragging the pen size left and right, or by holding Control and scrolling up and down on your mouse. So as I now left click and paint on the corner of this cube, you'll see that it has painted the volume that the sphere was digging into the cube rather than a circle from that perspective. Let's try it again on the corner over here, and you can see that it is not being distorted like the circle I painted with the circle tool was. You can also see that that is then painting the volume around these corners, including any hidden facets. The sphere is placed on the surface that your cursor is pointing at. So if there is a surface in the background of that sphere, if it's not within the sphere, it's not going to get painted. Equally, you could point at a surface behind something that's in the foreground and it's not going to paint the thing in the foreground. So if I hit the Erase All button, I'm going to do a quick comparison between the circle and the sphere tools. So with the circle tool selected, I'll paint a circle on this corner of the cube, and then I will switch to the sphere tool and I will paint another circle on this corner of the cube. As you can see, the circle is a perspective-based paint tool, whereas the sphere is a volumetric-based paint tool. Both of these can be particularly useful at different times painting different objects. Okay, with that all erased, let's switch to the next tool, which is triangle. As you may know, your object is entirely made up of flat-sided triangles. Each of these triangles can be selected with the triangle tool and painted individually. This can be useful depending on the design of your print to quickly paint specific areas of your print, ensuring you've got a nice straight edge to it. As with the other painting tools, as well as just clicking and selecting a specific area, you can click and drag to paint a whole area. By doing this, you can paint a wider area more quickly. However, if you were doing this, especially with the triangle tool, I'd suggest that you do this slowly, as if you paint too quickly whilst dragging across with the triangle tool, it may skip some triangles, resulting in unpainted areas. If I really quickly paint here, you'll see that it has missed some triangles. I can obviously go back and paint these, but my recommendation would be is if you're clicking and dragging with the triangle tool, just paint slowly and it will get every area the first time round. Let's get that all erased and we'll move on to the next tool, which is the height range paint tool. This allows you to paint the entire object that you've got selected from one height on the Z-axis to another height on the Z-axis. You can change the height range up here by either dragging the bar or entering your desired millimeters. Between these two white lines is the range that you have selected, and this is what will be painted. You can click or you can click and drag. You can see that because this is painting the whole range, it is not obscured by what is and isn't visible as you're painting it. It will paint that whole Z-axis range. And you'll see as I hover over the model with the height range tool selected, on the right hand side is a dial that says bottom with a number, and this is the distance between the bottom of the object and the bottom line of the height range that you currently have highlighted. The next tool we have is the fill tool. Now with this selected, by default it has edge detection turned on. We'll come to this in a minute, but for now we'll untick this. As the name suggests, the fill tool will fill an area that you have selected. As I hover over the print, you can see that there are three areas that are being highlighted. There is the white area, the orange area, and the other white area. With edge detection turned off, it will fill any area of the print up to the point that it meets a border of a different painted line. In other words, it will paint the entire area of color that you have selected. So as I've painted this bottom section, the whole bottom section is now orange, and now there are only two highlighted areas that I could paint. You can see that as I painted that bottom area orange, it is then joined with the top area of orange, and then I was able to paint that entire area in green. With edge detection turned on, not only is the fill tool limited by areas of a specific color, but it is also restricted by the shape of the object. If I change to a different color now, as I hover over the object, you'll see that I'm able to highlight just a specific area of the shape. If I click that, I've now just painted the end of this cylinder, and it hasn't painted any other part of the model. However, if I zoom in on the object now, because there's no true curves in an STL, it's all made out of flat faces, you can see that the edge of this cylinder is made up of a series of flat rectangles. If I was to highlight and fill one of these, it only fills the rectangle. However, if I go up and change the smart fill angle setting now to, let's say, 9, if I then hover back over the cylinder's curve, it will highlight the entire curve for me and I can paint the whole cylinder. The fill tool will not paint any surface that has an angle greater than the angle you've set here from the facet which you clicked on. But as well as angles, it's also still restricted by existing paint lines. So you can see here that I've painted this rectangle, which was defined by the green paint line and the 90-degree angles of the cube. Depending on the type of models that you're printing, due to its versatility, the fill tool is likely the paint tool that you're going to be using the most. and you can set the angle all the way up to 90 degrees. The next tool is the gap fill tool, but to show you this properly, I'm actually going to get rid of this cube and import a different model which will better demonstrate what it does. I'll go ahead and import the Kali Dragon. With that on the bed and with it selected, I'll go back to the color paint tool, and to get it prepared to show you the gap fill tool, I'm going to actually switch back to the normal fill tool and change the smart fill angle to around 20 degrees. I'm then going to just click on the Kali Dragon and it's painted it orange, but you can see there's lots of tiny gaps that it hasn't quite painted as a result of the difference in angle in those specific areas. I'm now going to switch to the circle tool and a different color. I'll make this pen a bit smaller, and I'm going to paint on an area around the face, which will give the dragon a very poorly painted mask. Once I've drawn a messy but completed circle, I'll switch back to the fill tool, turn off edge detection, and then fill within that circle. You can now see that there are gaps in the painting in both the green and the orange area as a result of the angles. Whilst these gaps were all caused by the fill tool, all of the painting tools can result in small missed gaps that you don't necessarily notice. The gap fill tool is a great way of rectifying this. Adjust the gap area so it is larger than the gaps you're trying to fill. There will be a preview on the model, so as you drag this, you will eventually see the gaps disappear. This will then fill the gaps with their neighboring colors, so you can see that the gaps in the green area have been made green, and the gaps in the orange area have been made orange. When you're happy with your settings, you can apply them either by clicking on your model or clicking Apply. If you hold Shift whilst using any of these paint tools, it will ignore the filament that you have selected and revert the area that you are painting back to the default filament color of that object. Now we've gone through the painting tools and controls, let's have a look at some of the painting techniques which I use when painting models in Bambu Studio. I'm going to import the AMS friendly version of my TARDIS lightbox, and I'll get these laid out so they're ready for painting. And this is the model we're going to be painting. It may look fairly straightforward, but there are some challenges, so I'm going to be going through some of the techniques which I use to make it easier and quicker to paint more effectively. There's a few key areas of detail that we'll be focusing on with this TARDIS lightbox. The first thing we want to do is set up the filaments and colors that we're going to use for it. So we want blue, white, black, and then we'll add another one and have that as silver. You may have noticed that whilst I changed the colors of the filaments, both objects on the print plates changed their color. This is because any object on your print plate by default is set to whatever filament you have in the first slot. So if I change this to yellow, they'll both become yellow. But we do want them to be blue, so I'll change this back to blue. Whilst an object's default filament is going to be whatever is in the first slot, if you right-click on an object and go to Change Filament, you can select any of the other filaments that you've currently got assigned, and that will be the default filament color for that object. It's easy to assume that the default color of an object should be the color which is most used in that object. So here it would be blue because most of the TARDIS is blue. However, ideally, the default color of your object should be the color which is used in the most difficult to paint areas of your model. So if we take a look at the sign on the door of the TARDIS, we want the sign to be white and the text to be black. If I take the fill tool, select white, I will then paint the front of this sign white. Let's zoom in a bit more so we can see the text. I'll now select black and paint the actual text black. However, once the letter is complete, you can see that the inside edges of these letters is still blue, and that's going to be really problematic once it's sliced. If these edges were too big for the gap fill tool, it would take ages going through painting all of these sides for the whole sign. So, if we were to right-click and change the default filament to white, and then go back into the paint tool with a black fill selected, all we would then have to do is paint the inside letters black. In this particular case, there is a lot of detail which needs painting in blue, so it makes sense to have the default color of the TARDIS as blue. Luckily, I have a different trick which will solve the issue with the letters on this sign for us, and I'm going to go through that now. With the default color set back to blue, let's zoom back in on the sign and then select the fill tool and white. We'll then paint the sign white, and we could then go through and paint the inserts of each of the letters, but we don't need to do that. All we need to do is select the sphere and then paint over all of the letters. By painting over them with the sphere tool, it is filling in the entire area. Not only is it painting these insert areas of the letters, it is also painting all of these small edges, regardless of whether the facets were visible or hidden. Then all we have to do is go back to black, select the fill tool again, and then fill in the backs of all of these letters. Now we've seen how the geometry can affect how the fill tool works, but it can also affect how a multi-material print is sliced. If we were to go to the fill tool and then paint in the windows in white, and then slice the model, you can see that the windows which I painted haven't been included at all in the sliced version of the model, despite the fact that the ones that I haven't painted are still all there. This is down to how Bambu Studio slices for multi-material prints. These windows are extremely thin and they are only thick enough for 2 extrusion lines. You can see in one of the windows that has been printed, it is only 2 lines thick. For a multi-material print, it wouldn't be stable enough to keep changing filament for each of these windows with just 1 extrusion on each side. Luckily, the solution is nice and simple. All we have to do is go back into paint mode, get the fill tool, and then paint the inside wall white. If we slice this again now, we'll be able to see that the windows are able to print without a problem. Because the inside wall is now white as well, it allows the extrusions to extend beyond the state of the windows and create a nice solid anchor. Next up, I'm going to move down to the keyhole, go back to fill with silver selected and paint the keyhole. If I slice this now, you'll see that as I look at it, there is a big blue blob in the middle of it. This is because I missed some areas with the keyhole. Even though this area is really small compared to the size of the filament, it still has to be represented once it's sliced, so it becomes a bigger and more obvious feature. Technically, these areas are small enough to be covered by the gap fill tool, but even slightly larger areas that are too big for the gap fill tool would still have the same impact, so you would need to make sure that all of these areas are painted. So if this was a bit too big for the gap fill tool, you'd have to use the normal fill tool and ensure that all 5 facets inside the keyhole were painted the correct colour. So these are the main painting techniques which I used whilst painting my TARDIS Lightbox model. However, there is one other technique I'd like to quickly go through which doesn't apply to this specific model but is useful to know. I'll import my test cube again, and then with it on the bed and with it selected, I'll go back to colour painting. What I wanted to show you here was related to the height range tool. If I wanted to paint this thing sticking out the side, I could technically just use the fill tool, but in a lot of cases that isn't going to be the easy option. You want to be able to use the height range tool. However, I obviously could only select a height range on the Z-axis. So what you need to do here is come out of the color paint tool, reposition your model so the area you want to print is on the Z-axis, go back into the paint tool, select your height range, paint the area that you want to paint in that height range, and then you can reorient the model however you want it ready for printing. If you'd like to print this TARDIS Lightbox yourself, I'll leave a link to this and the rest of the TARDIS collection in the description below. This was my painting masterclass looking at painting tools and painting techniques in Bambu Studio. I've already released a video covering how to paint internal volumes, specific colours, so make sure you check that out. I'll leave a link to that in the description below as well. I've got another video coming soon where I look at the multi-material printing process in Bambu Studio as a whole, covering things like flushing volumes and purge towers. Well, I hope that's helped you get your easel and palette set up and ready to get painting in Bambu Studio. If you do have your own tips or techniques that you'd like to share with the community, make sure you pop them in the comments below because I'd love to see them, and I'm sure everyone else would too. Until next time, thanks very much and happy printing. Thanks very much for sticking right to the end, guys. I've got tons of other videos for you to check out, from other Bambu Studio tutorials to just general 3D printing and maker content. Again, thanks very much, and until next time, happy printing.